10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret. In every era, certain gemstones have shaped economies, shaped empires, and fueled trade across continents. But some of the most precious stones have never been free to roam the world's markets. They weren't just rare, they were controlled. Nations built walls around their mines, drafted laws to restrict trade, and kept their most precious gems secret for decades, even centuries. This isn't a story about treasures lost to time. It's a record of deliberate decisions, where geology meets politics, and the result is secrecy on a national scale. In today's episode, we'll cross deserts, climb remote plateaus, and set foot on lands where access is a privilege few have ever had. Every stone on this list is here for a reason. They are too precious, too symbolic, or too strategically important to be in open circulation. And the forces that kept them hidden have shaped history and the market we know today. Ranked 10th, Painite, Myanmar. One of the clearest examples of a nation exercising near-total control over a gemstone's existence did not emerge from antiquity, but in the middle of the 20th century. In 1951, in the gem-rich district of Mogok in northern Myanmar, British mineralogist Arthur C.D. Payne, then surveying ruby and spinel, was handed an intense reddish-brown crystal with faint pink overtones and a transparency uncommon for the region's corundum and spinel. Optical measurements, refractive index testing, and classic wet chemical analysis revealed that the specimen matched no known mineral. Its hexagonal crystal structure, formula calcium, zirconium, aluminum, 9-oxide 15 boron 3, and the presence of zirconium marked it as an entirely new species. Named Painite in honor of its discoverer, the stone was catalogued and placed in the collections of London's Natural History Museum. What followed is what elevates Painite into the realm of state-level secrecy. For over 50 years, no additional mine reports emerged, and the global gem trade could account for only 2 complete crystals and a handful of fragments, all traceable back to Mogok. The reason was not simply geological rarity, it was the combination of extreme scarcity with a state-controlled access regime. Mogok was classified as a restricted zone. Foreign entry required government-issued permits that were virtually impossible to obtain and were granted almost exclusively to teams focused on rubies or sapphires. Painite was never on the official agenda. Local miners, whose livelihoods depended on corundum and spinel, guarded any occurrence of the new mineral in silence. To disclose its location risked either losing access to the fund or triggering competition from beyond their community. In effect, Painite became a commercial secret on a national scale. International gemological laboratories, when rare samples surfaced, could determine from chemistry and inclusion patterns that the stone formed in metamorphic environments associated with spinel and corundum-bearing marbles, a Mogok hallmark. But without open access to the region, no one could verify or map the source. It was only in the mid-2000s, when a small number of Mogok and nearby deposits were reassessed by domestic mining groups with international trading connections, that the primary painite-bearing zones were confirmed. Production increased compared to the 2 known crystals era, but remained extremely limited, supplying primarily collectors in a narrow segment of the high-end gem market. Crucially, data on reserves, ore quality, and extraction plans have never been made public. Today, Painite retains its status as one of the rarest gemstones in commercial circulation. Its rarity is a product not only of mineralogy, but of more than half a century of controlled access and tightly managed information. In the context of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Painite stands as proof that a state can turn a scientific discovery into something close to a classified file, not to preserve heritage, but to retain absolute control over supply and knowledge flow. Ranked 9th, Turquoise, Neyshabur, Iran. In the arid highlands of northeastern Iran, near the city of Neyshabur, lies what is widely regarded as the world's oldest continually operating turquoise mine, a source that for centuries has been both a national asset and a guarded state resource. The gemstone here is cryptocrystalline copper aluminum phosphate, formed in weathered volcanic host rock under arid, oxidizing conditions. Neyshabur turquoise is distinctive. Its color spectrum runs from sky blue to greenish blue, often with golden-brown limonite matrix, and its stability and saturation establish it as the benchmark for Persian turquoise in global trade. Historical accounts date active mining back more than a millennium, with early Islamic-era sources describing it as a tribute material for rulers and a valued commodity along the Silk Road. By the Safavid dynasty of the 16th and 17th centuries, the mine operated under direct royal patronage. Extraction was regulated, miners worked under supervision, and the highest-grade stones were reserved for court commissions, religious architecture, and diplomatic gifts. Control over Neyshabur turquoise persisted through successive dynasties. Even when private or local operators were involved, production quotas, taxation, and export oversight remained under central authority. The finest material was routinely withheld from open markets, either channeled through state-sanctioned trade or retained entirely for domestic use. Physical and administrative access to the site has long been restricted. It occupies a semi-enclosed complex where entry requires government authorization. This intersection of geology, history, and regulation meant that for foreign gem traders, knowledge of the mine's operations often came only through state-issued photographs or carefully managed tours. In the modern era, production is handled by state-affiliated cooperatives, with extraction rights granted under limited concessions. Exports face quality inspection and customs declaration, and high-grade rough is often withheld from bulk shipment to preserve Iran's reputation as a source of finished, high-value gems. While turquoise industries in the American Southwest, the Sinai Peninsula, and China function in open market conditions, Neyshabur remains a semi-closed system with undisclosed production data and reliance on domestic intermediaries. Its enduring prestige is inseparable from this long-standing tradition of controlled access, a continuity of policy that has kept the mine's finest output in the realm of national stewardship, ensuring that the most valuable stones serve strategic and cultural purposes rather than unrestricted market demand. Ranked 8th, Blue Sapphire, Sri Lanka. At the High Security Export Center in Colombo, trays of blue corundum are examined under bright lamps before they can leave the country. Each stone is weighed, measured, graded, and recorded, not just for valuation, but to determine whether it is even allowed to cross Sri Lanka's borders. This process is the culmination of centuries of sapphire mining, concentrated in the river gravels of Ratnapura and surrounding districts, where high-grade metamorphic bedrock has, over geologic time, weathered into gem-rich alluvium. Sri Lanka's blue sapphire, internationally known as Ceylon sapphire, is celebrated for its saturated yet luminous blue tones and high clarity, qualities that have made it central to royal regalia, state gifts, and high jewelry houses for generations. Historical records show sapphire from the island moving along Indian Ocean trade routes for over 1,000 years. Still in the modern era, it is the control of that movement, not the discovery of the deposits, that defines its secrecy. Since the formation of the National Gem and Jewelry Authority, NGJA, Sri Lanka has enforced a regulatory system that prevents its finest rough sapphires from being exported without first entering the domestic value chain. Uncut stones exceeding specified thresholds of weight, color, and clarity must be offered to licensed local cutters and dealers before any foreign sale is considered. All gem exports pass through the NGJA certification, ensuring quality and legality, but also allowing the state to retain the highest grade material for domestic cutting and polishing. This policy has reshaped the sapphire trade. It channels profits from finishing work into the national economy, maintains a steady domestic supply for local jewelers, and keeps control over how much premium-grade Ceylon sapphire reaches global markets. For international buyers, access to top-tier Sri Lankan blue sapphire is possible only through domestic partners, and prices reflect both global demand and the scarcity engineered by these export restrictions. The impact is visible in auction records and market availability. The most exceptional stones rarely appear outside Sri Lanka unless cut and sold through approved channels. Production data for the highest grades remains confined to official reports, and the location of wealthy deposits is guarded within the gem industry. In the framework of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Sri Lanka's blue sapphire demonstrates how a government can transform an open geological resource into a managed national asset, preserving prestige and economic benefit by keeping the most coveted material firmly under its oversight. Ranked 7th, Lapis Lazuli, Badakhshan, Afghanistan. High in the Hindu Kush, in a narrow valley reachable only by steep passes and seasonal tracks, the Sari Sang mines of Badakhshan have been worked for over 6,000 years. The stone extracted here is not sapphire or jade, but a deep blue metamorphic rock composed primarily of lazurite, often flecked with pyrite and veined with calcite. Its color and durability made it one of the most prized decorative materials in the ancient world, ground into pigment for Egyptian tomb paintings, carved into amulets for Mesopotamian rulers, and traded along the early Silk Road. For most of recorded history, Badakhshan was the sole known source of lapis lazuli in significant quantity, and its control conferred both wealth and symbolic power. Medieval chronicles describe caravans leaving these valleys under armed guard, bound for courts as far as Venice and Beijing, their cargoes handled by trusted intermediaries. In the modern era, the secrecy around Badakhshan lapis has been less about its geological location, which has been known to traders for centuries, and more about who can access it, how much is extracted, and where it is sold. The mines sit in one of Afghanistan's most remote and politically fragile regions, where the central government's reach has historically been limited. Periods of strong state control, such as during the reign of King Zahir Shah, saw mining permits tightly issued and exports routed through official state companies. During times of conflict, control often shifted to local commanders or armed groups, each imposing their restrictions on who could mine, buy, or transport the stone. In all cases, outsiders have faced barriers, rugged terrain, security risks, and the need for negotiated permission from whichever authority held the valley at the time. Even in recent decades, when international awareness of the mines has grown, the flow of Badakhshan lapis remains opaque. Production figures are rarely published, and shipments often move through layers of domestic intermediaries before reaching international markets. High-grade material can be withheld entirely from bulk export, sold instead to select buyers, or retained within regional networks. For foreign gem dealers, obtaining top-quality Sari Sang lapis often requires direct connections inside Afghanistan and the willingness to work within a closed, tightly monitored supply chain. In the context of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Badakhshan lapis exemplifies a resource whose secrecy is sustained not by hidden geology, but by centuries of controlled access. A blend of geography, politics, and selective release that has kept its finest material out of open, unregulated circulation. Ranked 6th, Ruby, Mogok, Myanmar. Before entering the Valley of Mogok, visitors pass through multiple checkpoints, each staffed by officials who verify permits, search vehicles, and record movements. This is not only a modern security measure, it is the continuation of a tradition that has surrounded Myanmar's most famous gemstone for centuries. Mogok rubies form in marble-hosted deposits. Their vivid pigeon's blood hue the result of chromium impurities in nearly pure corundum. These rubies have been sought after for over 1,000 years, appearing in the regalia of Burmese kings, temple treasures, and later the crown jewels of other nations. The richness of Mogok's deposits made them a strategic asset long before the concept of a modern mining industry existed. Under the Kembang dynasty in the 18th and 19th centuries, the mines were worked under royal decree, with the finest stones reserved for the monarch and court, and lesser material traded under regulated conditions. British colonial administration, after annexing Upper Burma in 1886, quickly moved to formalize control, establishing leasing arrangements that placed the richest pits in the hands of favored companies. In every era, access to Mogok was limited. Prospectors and traders without official sanction risked confiscation of goods or expulsion from the district. After independence, successive Burmese governments, and later the military junta, maintained or tightened these controls, integrating ruby mining into state-owned enterprises or joint ventures, closely tied to political and military leadership. Foreign gemologists and journalists were rarely granted access, and when they were, their movements and photography were supervised. In practice, this has meant that reliable information on Mogok ruby production has always been scarce. Export data, when published, is aggregated with other gemstones, and high-quality rough is often sold through closed auctions, inaccessible to the general trade. The security measures at the district's perimeter are matched by informal controls inside. Local knowledge about the richest veins is guarded, and families or partnerships often hold mining claims with long-standing ties to regional authorities. For the international market, this system creates both allure and scarcity. The best Mogok rubies are known by name in auction catalogs, but their path from mine to sale is rarely transparent. Within 10 gemstones that nations try to keep secret, the Mogok ruby stands as an example of how a gemstone's prestige can be amplified by the layers of access control around it, where the limits on who can see, mine, or buy are as defining as the geological conditions that created it. Ranked 5th, Tanzanite, Tanzania. On the slopes of Mount Kilimanjaro's southern foothills, a fortified perimeter of concrete walls, guard towers, and security checkpoints surrounds a 4 square kilometer zone. This is Merirani, the only known source of Tanzanite in the world. The gemstone itself is a blue to violet variety of zoisite, formed under specific geological conditions involving regional metamorphism and trace amounts of vanadium. Discovered in 1967, Tanzanite quickly became a commercial success, promoted globally for its unique color and single-source rarity. But as demand grew, so did the Tanzanian government's determination to keep its value and the best of its production under national control. By the 1970s, the state had assumed a direct role in mining through nationalized operations, later reorganized into a system of licensed blocks leased to domestic and foreign companies. Access to these blocks was restricted, and a combination of licensing, documentation, and on-site inspections regulated the trade in rough Tanzanite. In 2017, the government constructed a physical wall around the Merirani mining area, over 20 kilometers long, to secure the deposit and reduce smuggling. At the same time, new laws required that all Tanzanite over 1 gram in weight be processed or cut within Tanzania before export, ensuring that the highest value-added stages of the trade benefited the domestic economy. This policy fundamentally changed how Tanzanite reached global markets. International buyers could no longer purchase significant quantities of top-grade rough directly at the mine. Instead, they had to work through Tanzanian dealers and cutting houses. While smaller, lower-grade stones still found their way into open channels, the finest examples were sold under tightly monitored conditions, often through government-run auctions. Production figures are periodically announced, but details on the distribution of the highest grades remain limited. For the gem trade, the Merirani Wall became a symbol. It marked the point at which Tanzanite shifted from a discovery in open circulation to a resource under comprehensive state stewardship. In the framework of 10 gemstones that nations try to keep secret, Tanzanite illustrates how a nation can, within a generation of discovery, construct both the physical and regulatory infrastructure to guard a deposit, deciding not just who can mine it, but who can own the finest stones and when they can leave the country. Ranked 4th, Emerald, Mons Smaragdus, Egypt. In the barren mountains east of the Nile, far from fertile land and deep within the eastern desert, the Roman Empire maintained a network of guarded settlements, watchtowers, and fortified roads leading to a single objective: the emerald mines of Mons Smaragdus. The name Latin for Emerald Mountain referred to a cluster of beryl-bearing schist deposits where vanadium and chromium trace elements produced the deep green coloration valued in Rome's elite circles. While emerald was known from other sources in antiquity, Mons Smaragdus became the empire's primary supply, worked by a labor force of convicts, soldiers, and skilled miners under direct imperial administration. The site's location, in an inhospitable region between the Nile Valley and the Red Sea, allowed both isolation and control. Every caravan required military escort, and unauthorized movement in or out of the district was forbidden. Ancient records and archaeological surveys show that mining at Mons Smaragdus began under the Ptolemies and expanded significantly during Roman rule. The most productive period coincided with the reign of Emperor Nero. It continued into the 4th century CE, when emerald-adorned imperial regalia, ceremonial weapons, and luxury objects were traded across the empire. Workshops within the fortified settlements cut and polished stones on site, ensuring that the highest quality material never left the desert unworked. Any surplus destined for export passed through state warehouses in the Nile ports, where inventories were documented and shipments taxed. Even after the decline of Roman control, secrecy around the mines persisted. Medieval Arabic sources mention Egyptian emeralds, but give only vague geographic references. By the time early European travelers reached the eastern desert in the 18th and 19th centuries, the original mining sites had already been abandoned and partially buried by shifting sands. Their precise locations were effectively lost to the outside world until archaeological expeditions in the 19th and 20th centuries rediscovered the fortified complexes and mining pits. In the context of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Mons Smaragdus is a rare example from antiquity where the secrecy was intentional, systemic, and state-driven. The Roman administration not only exploited the deposit, but built an infrastructure of isolation, record-keeping, and on-site processing to ensure that control over the gem's supply remained absolute. An approach that, for centuries, kept the source of these emeralds as much a guarded asset as the stones themselves. Ranked third, Nephrite, Khotan, Haitian, China, Qing Dynasty. Along the southern rim of the Taklamakan Desert, where the Kunlun Mountains feed rivers into the oases of Xinjiang, lies the ancient source of China's most revered jade, nephrite from Khotan, known historically as Haitian jade. This amphibally-rich mineral, typically white to pale green with a dense waxy luster, formed in metamorphosed serpentinite and was carried downstream in river cobbles, most famously in the Urunkash, the White Jade River. For over 2 millennia, Khotan jade had been traded across Central Asia, but under the Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1912, it became not just a luxury material, but an imperial monopoly. By the reign of the Qianlong Emperor in the 18th century, jade was deeply embedded in state ideology, symbolizing virtue, authority, and the moral perfection of the ruler. Imperial edicts formalized exclusive rights to the finest nephrite deposits for the throne. Mining teams and river jade collectors operated under official appointment, their output transported in guarded caravans to the Forbidden City. Local miners were forbidden to sell top-grade material to private merchants, and smuggling was punishable by severe penalties. This control extended beyond extraction. Qing officials oversaw weighing, grading, and documentation at collection points, and tribute shipments were recorded in the imperial archives. The scale of the operation was vast. Archival records describe expeditions to the mountains to extract mountain jade from bedrock and seasonal campaigns to gather river jade when glacial meltwaters revealed boulders in the riverbeds. Both types were sorted, with the choicest reserved for imperial workshops in Beijing, where artisans carved ritual vessels, official seals, and presentation gifts for foreign envoys. Lower grades were sometimes distributed as rewards to loyal officials, but the market for high-quality Khotan jade outside the court was deliberately constrained. Even after the Qing dynasty fell, the association of Khotan nephrite with state power lingered, and access to certain river reaches remained restricted. Modern geological surveys and mining operations have expanded supply. Yet the legacy of Qing-era control is still remembered in the way premium Khotan jade is marketed and in the guarded knowledge surrounding the richest historical deposits. Within the scope of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Khotan nephrite illustrates how an imperial court could convert a regional resource into a tightly held symbol of sovereignty, where secrecy was enforced not by geography alone, but by a political vision of jade as the physical embodiment of rule. Ranked second, Grandidierite, Madagascar. When gemologists first identified Grandidierite in 1902, it came not from a bustling mining district, but as a solitary specimen collected near the southern tip of Madagascar. The mineral, a rare magnesium-aluminium borosilicate, displayed a blue-green pleochroism unlike anything then catalogued. Named after French naturalist Alfred Grandidier, the stone immediately drew academic interest. But it was so scarce that for decades it existed in the gem world only as a mineralogical curiosity. No commercial deposit was known, and the few crystals in museums came from isolated finds of non-gem quality. Then, in the early 2000s, rumors began circulating among traders in Antananarivo. Somewhere in the island's south, high-quality Grandidierite was being extracted, and the location was not on any published geological map. The secrecy was deliberate. Local miners and intermediaries, aware of the stone's potential value, withheld details of the site to prevent an influx of unlicensed diggers and to control the flow of material. Parcels reaching international markets were small, often mixed with other stones, and offered without precise origin. Even experienced dealers found it difficult to trace the source. Madagascar's mining laws, which require permits for the extraction and export of precious stones, gave the government leverage to monitor what little was declared. But in practice, much of the high-grade Grandidierite moved through private networks before official channels ever saw it. It was not until 2014 to 2016 that credible reports emerged confirming a primary deposit near Tranamaro in Androy region. By then, the site was already under a patchwork of local control, with access limited to those who had secured informal agreements with landholders and community leaders, alongside formal permits from provincial authorities. Production remained small-scale, with miners working shallow pits and sorting material on site. The finest stones, transparent and richly colored, were sold in tightly controlled lots, their scarcity amplified by the years of mystery surrounding the deposit's location. In the framework of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Grandidierite illustrates a form of resource secrecy, born not from state monopoly alone, but from a convergence of local strategy, limited geology, and regulatory oversight. By keeping the richest pocket of the deposit out of public knowledge for more than a decade, those closest to it ensured that Grandidierite would enter the gem market not as an abundant new commodity, but as a controlled rarity. Its reputation shaped as much by the story of its concealment as by the vivid color locked within its crystals. In first place, Jadeite, Hpakant, Myanmar. In northern Myanmar's Kachin state, the town of Hpakant sits in a basin ringed by forested hills and scarred by terraces of pale earth, the exposed seams of the world's richest source of imperial jadeite. This pyroxene mineral, sodium and aluminium rich, forms under high-pressure, low-temperature metamorphism in subduction zone terrains. At the same time, jadeite occurs in Guatemala, Japan, and a few other locales. No other deposit matches Hpakant for the volume and quality of its deep, translucent green, chromium-bearing stones. In China, where jade has symbolized status and virtue for millennia, imperial jadeite from Myanmar became the pinnacle of the craft, commanding the highest prices in the carving workshops of Beijing and Guangzhou. That demand made the Hpakant mines not just an economic asset, but a national and political instrument. The modern era of jadeite extraction began in the 19th century, when trade routes between Upper Burma and Yunnan expanded under the Konbaung dynasty and later under British colonial administration. Even then, Hpakant was remote and difficult to reach. River and overland routes could be closed for months during the rainy season, and local leaders informally regulated access. After Myanmar's independence, control shifted repeatedly between state enterprises, military-backed companies, and allied private operators. By the late 20th century, jadeite had become one of the country's largest foreign exchange earners, and one of its most closely guarded industries. The state's control is exercised at every stage. Mining concessions are awarded selectively, often to entities with military or political connections. Entry into Hpakant requires government clearance, and movement within the mining areas is monitored. Official production and revenue figures are published only in aggregate, obscuring the actual quantity and quality of jadeite extracted. Large-scale operations work with fleets of excavators and high-pressure water cannons, stripping away overburden to reach jade-bearing boulders, while licensed cooperatives work smaller pits. The highest-grade stones, capable of selling for millions of dollars each, are typically sold in closed auctions in Naypyidaw or Mandalay, open only to vetted buyers. Smuggling routes do exist, moving lower-grade jadeite into neighboring countries, but the top end of the market remains effectively state-controlled. This selective release maintains both scarcity and price, reinforcing Myanmar's position as the sole gatekeeper of imperial quality jadeite. For foreign gem dealers, Access to such stones depends on invitation to official auctions or private arrangements with licensed operators, pathways that can close without notice. Within the framework of 10 gemstones that nations tried to keep secret, Jadeite stands at the apex because it embodies every mechanism of resource secrecy: geological singularity, geographic isolation, historical prestige, political gatekeeping, and economic leverage. Here, the stone's journey from bedrock to market is less a matter of mining logistics than of navigating a deliberately fortified system, one designed to ensure that the finest jadeite remains, above all, under Myanmar's command. Across continents and centuries, these 10 gemstones were not just the products of geology, they were shaped by human decisions. Who could mine them? Who could buy them? And who was never meant to see them at all? Each was a resource transformed into a guarded asset, its movement dictated as much by law, geography, and politics as by the limits of nature. The boundaries around them have shifted over time. Some have opened, others remain as closed as ever. But the pattern is clear. When a stone holds economic weight, cultural meaning, or strategic value, control becomes part of its story. The secrecy is not an accident. It is part of the design. Understanding these histories changes how we see a gemstone. It is no longer only an object of beauty, but a marker of the systems that protected it, the powers that profited from it, and the people who worked in its shadow. And long after the current owners change, those systems leave an imprint hidden in the chain of custody, just as surely as the crystal lattice holds the stone's color.